Hey, what's up? This is Nick Hayden. Even though I just won the USGP, I'm not about to listen to no Soupkast. I got better things to do. I'm not going to listen. Y'all take it easy.
Welcome to the surface of Superbike Planet.
The SuperbikePlanet.com podcast, Soupkast, is brought to you by American Honda.
Hello and welcome to Soupkast, SuperbikePlanet.com's entry on the grid of racing podcasts found on iTunes. This is Soupkast number 9 for July 26th, 2006. This podcast is basically a wrap-up of the USGP weekend at Laguna Seca Raceway and was recorded Sunday night in Julian Ryder's hotel room in Monterey. I'd now tell you what we spoke about in great detail, but after 3 or 4 days in the oppressive Laguna heat, I cannot now remember any details of this session. We tried to get as much from Julian as we could, as it's always a joy to have an expert around. Just a brief aside before we get to the good stuff. It's hard to know now what the most memorable detail of the 2006 USGP will be as the years pass. Nick Hayden's second win, which was one for the ages, or perhaps Valentino Rossi's tragic and altogether surprising DNF in the race. The heat at the track was of course a defining factor of the event for both the spectators and the racers. Hayden's fitness was amazing, as after the event he looked like he could do 20 more laps, while his competitors looked like they were ready to reel off their bikes and fall face down on the ground. Personally, what struck me was that Valentino Rossi actually continued to circulate after the engine in his Yamaha very publicly and clearly tied itself into knots in the race. I found it just incredible that he did a lap or a lap and a half, much of it on the racing line, after he saw that the bike was ingesting itself and spewing oil. That was, I thought, surprisingly bad behavior from a multi-time world champion. I don't know what the Midwestern club race scene is like today, but I do know that if a rider did that, ride on the racing line with a failed and oil-spewing engine at a club race in the early 1990s, when said rider returned to his van after the race, there would most assuredly be a couple of gentlemen waiting for him who would make sure he knew in no uncertain terms not to ever do that again. Regardless, the 06 USGP was largely a wonderful event, and it seems fans will put up with a litany of minor obstacles if in doing so they get to see the MotoGP bikes and riders. Great enthusiasm. Let's hear it from Julian, Evan, and myself. Well, here we are on Soupkast number 9 already. We have tonight in the studio Evan Williams. Hello. Julian Ryder.
Good evening.
And your host, me. Let's see, the U.S. Grand Prix ran today with Nick Hayden taking an epic win. Let's go around the table here and give some thoughts of the day and pluses, minuses, highlights, anything else that occurs to you. Start with Julian.
Well, the obvious minus is Valentino Rossi, who over 2 whole races worth of points off the lead now. He concedes absolutely that's the championship gone. It's hard to see how he can come back from this position. Big winner, Nicky Hayden, fairly obviously. I mean, it goes without saying. Some other losers lurking downfield, like Colin Edwards, Ducati, who never got the bike working at all. Nothing to do with the Bridgestones, apparently. It was set up, same as Kawasaki. And a really pleasant surprise that the Bridgestones on the Suzuki were so competitive with Chris Vermeulen. I did not see that one coming.
Evan?
Yeah, I thought the Vermeulen performance today was rather surprising. I guess we should have been surprised. He did great at Laguna and World Superbike in past years, but he really put on a really good show out there. But Nicky was not to be denied. He really came through on a big day where he needed to come through. And after the race, he said that this was better than last year because he struggled some this year, that he had a magic year last year, but this one he really had to work for.
Downsides of the day from you, Evan?
I was expecting a little more out of Kenny Jr. He had a good top 5 there. I believe he was 4th place, but after the early part of the weekend, I think people were wanting a little more. The other 2 Americans, Colin Edwards and John Hopkins, I think maybe could have had a better performance as well.
As for myself, I think I'd say I wish we'd seen more of a fight from Valentino Rossi. I think there was going to be something happening there in the end between perhaps he and Nicky until he went missing. That was kind of saddening. Other than that, talked to Nicky after the race, and It's just amazing to see someone who loves winning that much for all the right reasons, just beaming. I saw him in the motorhome, and he was really almost glowing. And I said that to him, and he just laughed and clapped. And it's a really sincere, happy win with him. On the downside, I guess I'm with you, and I'd hoped we'd see more from Kenny Jr. And again, I guess the Rossi thing just pulls the rug out from under all of us, really. Anything else to note from the day, gentlemen?
I think the only thing to say is that Laguna got most things right this year, having come in for some criticism last year, which was toned down because it was the first year. If there had been a repeat of last year, then I wouldn't have been like to know what the Italians and Spanish journalists would have done in there. There'd have been a riot. But everything worked, apart from the track, which is a motocross track, and one that's falling apart. So that needs, as everybody's agreed, that needs curing, and then you've got a great Grand Prix.
Mm-hmm. Evan?
Jamie Hacking won 2 races today as well. They were delayed after the Grand Prix. Hacking won Super Sport and Super Stock. He leads both those championships, and he's really put together a good year, and he's won the last 2 races at both rounds. I think a lot of the AMA guys were disappointed in how their side of the weekend went. I think they would have liked a little more consideration in the way things were going, but they obviously were the backseat to the Grand Prix teams and their desires this weekend.
I'll hit with an obscure note and say that I was disappointed in the heat. The heat just kind of took the legs out from everyone this weekend, and it was very difficult to work in any capacity. And I just salute those fans that were up on the hill and in the vendor area and walking around trying to stay hydrated. And there was almost 4 hours of near silence today because the 2 AMA races were postponed until later in the day. I thought there would be a mass river of people leaving, but there wasn't. They sat in the sun and they liked it, almost like they do at Jerez, and it was almost as dirty as Jerez as well.
If there'd have been delay like that at Jerez or Mugello, there'd have been a riot.
Right.
It wouldn't. The American fans took it in a very good part, I thought.
Yes.
I was disappointed in the level of the celebrities that showed up for this year's race.
Yeah, not exactly Brad Pitt this year, was it?
No, it wasn't. Pamela Anderson and some other gentleman that we had to look up his profile on the Internet Movie Database, and really wasn't that impressive, honestly. So that part of it really kind of stuck.
As an Englishman, I'd like to say that seeing Neil Hodgson on a rostrum yesterday was pretty good as well. I thought he rode well. I really did.
I found it quite intriguing that suddenly the Ducati is very competitive and the Kawasaki is very competitive. A week after the traction control rule comes out. Quite interesting. I'm not, I'd really like to know more about that, I guess is how I'll leave it.
Yeah. Well, it's Nicky's big weekend, but Tommy got his first Superbike podium this weekend.
Right, yeah, good point. Good point. I also thought it was nice that Nicky, you could kind of tell there in the press conference when his voice was kind of breaking. He said, he owed a lot of his victory to his brother, because his brother, Tommy, took him aside last night and again this morning sometime and ran the track through his head and was asking him questions and trying to Q&A him into, grinding the guy into a better race package for the day, and he did it.
Should bring that's his older brother, yes?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Should get him over to Bruno and the rest of them then.
Could be. He's there's kind of a lineage there with Doug Chandler coached Tommy very closely, and then now Tommy is coaching, I guess, Nicky very closely as well.
I think we'd be a little remiss if we didn't mention Ben Spies won the AMA Superbike race on Saturday. Matt Bladden had a poor finish, and Ben expanded his points lead.
Right. It was sort of odd. Matt, who's in the best shape of any rider in the paddock, really didn't seem to roll with the heat very well. That's the way I read it.
Yeah, he and Ben Bostrom both had problems.
You and I interviewed Matt in his motorhome on Friday,
I believe it was.
Friday afternoon, and I left my hat in his motorhome, and I had to come back yesterday and get it in the sweltering heat. And I called him on his cell phone and said, "Can I get my hat?" He said, "Yeah, come by." So I went there with all intent and purposes of jumping in the motorhome and cooling off and maybe talking to Matt for a few minutes, and I knocked on the door and tried to almost take a step in, and suddenly this arm came down through the motorhome and there was my hat in my hand, and I looked up and Matt did not look well, and I grabbed my hat and he took a couple and I closed the door. So Interesting to say the least.
So Jeremy McWilliams' theory that he told me at a pub last night that the 3 fittest guys in the AMA paddock got on the rostrum, holds water or not?
Yeah, definitely. The 3 of them are very fit. It's hard to believe to use the category of fittest guys in AMA and not have Matt Mladen in there. Agree?
I would agree. But I do think there's something to it, to McWilliams' theory.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anything else, gentlemen?
I think that's got it. It was a good weekend.
Absolutely. The Rossi thing really just completely unexpected.
I think there's only 2 tracks he's never won at. This one and Turkey.
Right.
And it's you've got to believe he's going to want to right that wrong before he's finished.
The chain of events, as we understand them, is that his tire chunked, and he had to slow. And when he slowed, the motor overheated, and
then blew, I assume.
led to
because
a failure.
there was certainly some oil around, from what Nicky said. Difficult to say, isn't it? He slowed a couple of seconds a lap, but was that enough to overheat it?
Yeah, it seemed a bit odd. I'm not sure, but it was hot, and
Yeah.
Colin said that he was so hot out there and feeling so miserable that he was almost going to pull in, and Colin had tire problems as well. So,
Well, the first Yamaha home was Checker on Dunlops.
yeah, Rossi again. His season, do you say, is it truly over? Do you think?
He said to a few of us that managed to get a word with him that at least now he can race without the pressure of the championship. He can just go out and race to win. So I do not think he's finished for the season. I really don't.
Yeah, I think Nicky said that in the press conference as well. Never say never, and that he wouldn't state emphatically that it was over.
I would think that's when Rossi's the most dangerous of all.
But he's over 2 whole race wins worth of points behind Nicky now. That is, unless Nicky has the mother of all misfortunes, you can't see 50 points.
2 questions for you, Jules. Is that kind of the Rossi interpretation of the rules, what we saw today, where he's on the racing line, he's leaking oil? I mean, in AMA, any bike, he's on the line, he's smoking, there's oil, you can smell oil, he's going to be black flagged and pulled in. Rossi did at least a couple laps there.
I got the impression that he was hoping the thing would limp home and he might get a point or 2.
I think it was quite apparent to everybody watching, though, that the thing is leaking oil and he's on the line, which I found just incredible.
Yeah, but I think he would have got a black flag if he'd have stayed out there longer. It does happen in Grand Prix. It's not.
Yeah, I was surprised that he didn't get a black flag after the first lap.
Really, it's funny because I was in the commentary box. I didn't smell and hear that, and it didn't occur to me instantly, I have to say. Interesting point.
And now what? There was some criticism about Honda recently that they weren't taking a team effort to the championship, that they were letting Pedrosa, Hayden, and the rest fight it out. Now,
when have Honda ever had a team effort? I mean, if you're Melandri, you don't ride for Honda, you ride for Fortuna, you ride for Fausto Grassini. You're not there to get out of the way of anybody. You know what Honda are like. As long as a Honda wins, Honda tend to be happy.
I guess, but they're closest to the MotoGP championship since Rossi left them.
Honda is a funny beast. If they win the team and the constructors, and get the 8 hour next weekend, you get the impression that while it irks them a fair bit, it ain't that, it's not the end of the world if they prove in inverted commas, that the best bike out there's a Honda. That seems to be their motivation.
Very curious, but they were able to crank those 200 win t-shirts out quick enough at
yes, but that's the bike winning. There's no rider's name on it.
True.
One point about, if I've got the time, Nicky has had no changes to that bike all year. He had a swinging arm for Donington, they tested it, wasted time, went wrong, put it in the back. Pedrosa has had the upgrades as the lead rider of the standard bike with a couple of evolutions to it. If you're Nicky, you have two choices. Either, my God, they're favouring me, I'm the one to develop the bike, they've got the faith in me to develop the new bike, that's great, or I'm doing the development work for a lightweight 800 for Pedrosa next year. And that's the, hang on, I'm in a team, it's Spanish orientated, it's a Spanish sponsor, I've seen how big this thing is in Spain. There's got to be a little nag at the back of the mind.
I completely agree. I wonder, it'll be quite interesting to watch.
Jules, what do you think of the AMA racing scene, or what does the MotoGP community think of Laguna and the AMA racing scene?
Good question. It's obviously a good domestic series. Certainly on a par with the British Superbike Championship, which is well supported with a lot of good factory bikes. Seems to me that AMA in things like Super Sport has a greater depth of good machinery. It's fun, and I've heard nobody complain about sharing the paddock or anything. I mean, we'd like to have the 125s and 250s here, but I think 250s round Laguna would be a hell of a race. Mm-hmm. Love to see Lorenzo and Dovizioso and those guys, elbow to elbow.
I think from our side, I just sense a lot of personal problem with the teams have problems with Dorna, and they have problems with the way things are organized there, and that they're treated like the proverbial red-headed stepchild, and they don't like it. And I think it doesn't seem to. There seems to be a degree of maybe the organizer or Dorna or whoever could be a bit nicer about some things, and it would probably go a long way.
What sort of things?
The
canopies in the pit lane, and we've got people falling over, and Dorna won't let them set up in the pit lane, and passes for the event for the riders, and things along those lines. I think they're definitely going a long way in creating some bad blood here in the United States, which is too bad. I guess with that, we'll close for this Soupkast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and look for us soon again on iTunes.
Soupkast is brought to you by American Honda.